It's Tuesday, it's 12:15 and we're live in Westminster.
The criminal smuggler gangs have had 6 years without any proper challenge to take deep root and to take hold, so we have to go after the gangs.
The Home Secretary talks tough on immigration as arrivals by small boats this year hit 10,000.
Nigel Farage has said that he wants to destroy the Conservative Party. You don't do pacts or do deals with someone who wants to destroy you.
I don't want to do a deal with the Conservatives. I only do deals in life with people that I trust. And frankly, after their big majority in 2019, they let the country down.
Conservative and Reform leaders reject a deal to unite the right.
President Trump is trying to break us so that America can own us. That will never, ever happen.
And has standing up to Trump secured a victory for the centre-left in Canada? Joining us today, 4 MPs, Labour's David Smith, Conservative Kit Malthouse, Reform UK's Deputy Leader Richard Tice and the Greens' Ellie Chowns. This is Politics Live. Hello and welcome. Let's start with this headline in The Times. It says sugar tax extended to milkshakes to tackle obesity and save the NHS cash. Ministers are considering bringing packaged milkshakes and lattes under a sugar tax or extending it for the first time. Good idea or not, David?
Good idea. Good for young people and their health.
Right. What do you think?
I'm not a taxer, but I am a labeller, Joe, so I'd like to know what's in this stuff. Did you know a standard McDonald's strawberry milkshake has twice the sugar, or has the sugar of 2 Mars bars in it? I'd like it in big letters on it so my kids know what they're eating.
Yeah, what do you think of that instead, David?
Yeah, I mean, information can help, can't it? But we know that it's been successful, the sugar tax has been successful with fizzy drinks. 89% now of fizzy drinks don't actually meet the tax, so it works. Good
idea to extend it in this way, Richard?
Instinctively, I'm not a taxer. I think better education, better labelling must be the way, but there's bigger things to worry about, frankly.
Oh, Ellie?
I think it's a really good idea. I think, you know, part of the job of government is to tax the things that are bad for us and to use that money to invest in the things that are good for us. So I support the extension of this so it's consistent across all types of drinks. And I'd like to see government invest more in active ways of helping young people, helping all of us, but young people especially, to eat more healthily. So, for example, free, nutritious, healthy, locally produced, sustainable school meals. Wouldn't that be a good thing to do with the revenues from this tax?
Nothing's for free. Someone's got to pay for it somewhere.
Well, that's what the sugar tax can do.
All right, well, let's get some more detail with the BBC's health editor, Hugh Pym. Hello to you, Hugh. Can you explain what the proposed extended sugar tax is all about?
Hi, Joe. Well, I think it's important just to look at the background to this, because when it was first announced for soft drinks in 2016, there was a 2-year gap before implementation in 2018. And over those 2 years, a lot of manufacturers reduced the sugar content of their soft drinks below the 5-gram taxable threshold. So they did that voluntarily. So by the time the tax was introduced, and not long afterwards, as we've just been hearing, 89% of soft drinks are not liable. So it was seen as a great success by health experts that the threat of a tax, as well as the actual implementation, had actually brought down sugar content. So the plan now is to reduce that threshold at which the tax applies from 5 grams to 4 grams per 100 millilitres, and also to extend it for the first time to milk-based drinks, including milkshakes and flavoured coffees. But importantly, those sold in cans or bottles in retail outlets. It's not going to affect a product where you might walk into your local coffee shop and order some sort of iced coffee made on the premises.
Right, well, that might be a relief to many of our panellists, if not today, at other times. Hugh, what about levels of obesity since the sugar tax was brought in? What's happened to those?
Well, it's going to be a very much debated issue, this, because you've got the actual factual situation. Sugar has been reduced. What would have happened if they hadn't introduced the sugar tax? Would obesity have got a lot worse? And clearly it is a major challenge. Now, the government announcement, the paperwork with this announcement that was made yesterday, said that there was evidence that it had prevented obesity in some 10 to 11-year-old primary school children. That's based on research. So that's what they're arguing. It's being argued quite strongly. There's still a major obesity problem. So reducing sugar from a wider based range of products, and of course milk-based products can have a lot of sugar in them, is only going to be a good thing on that front. But I think we'll have to wait longer for a consistent amount of evidence on this to emerge.
Hugh Pym, thank you very much. Kit Morthouse, did you oppose the introduction of the sugar tax when it was brought in by George Osborne?
I wasn't in the House at the time, I don't think.
Oh, well, would you have opposed it?
I do think there's an issue with... There's a sort of balance to be struck. So, for example, I agree, tax on cigarettes, great. You know, obviously the one-to-one harm there. But I do think we've got to be slightly careful where the government starts increasingly to take responsibility for our health. What you find is the public generally start to take less and less responsibility for their health. And so my view is that we need to give people as much information as possible so that once they're properly informed, they can make the right decision for themselves. If you remember, there was a proposal to ban buy one, get one free food, i.e. to make food more expensive for people on the basis that it was encouraging consumption. Well, I'm not sure that's...
Although
right,
the figures,
but then you look at a lot of this stuff in the supermarket. When you actually do read the stuff on the label, if you do the Eddie Abu, if you're a fan on Instagram, have a look. If you do the Eddie Abu, read what's in there, you suddenly realise with fine print, oh my God, I'm consuming a huge amount of sugar.
And I'll come to it.
So information is fine. I completely agree with that. We need to inform consumers so that they know what's going in their bodies. At the same time, 6 out of 10 admissions to hospital of young people are to do with tooth decay. So it's not just obesity is a major issue, but also you know, tooth decay. So this is something you talked about, cigarette use. I quite agree with that, Kit. But this is a serious health issue, and it's something that works, as we've seen.
Right. I mean, Richard, listening to what Hugh Pym was saying as well, I mean, it seems to work in two ways. One, it actually nudges a lot of manufacturers in terms of reducing the amount of sugar anyway by introducing a tax, and it has health benefits.
Well, I think the nudge point is very valid, but actually we know that obesity levels are getting worse. I think it is all about education. I mean, the whole issue of increasing concerns and dangers of processed food is clearly a massive issue, potentially more important. You talk about tooth decay. Is that sugar in drinks, or is it actually the inability to get hold of a dentist?
Well, it's multi-factors, isn't it?
Yeah, but I just think we need so much more education early doors about the dangers of processed foods and sugar.
Well, you could have both, I suppose.
Well, exactly. I'm frankly amazed it's so potentially controversial to say that, you know, the government should use tax, one of the policy levers at our disposal, to try to encourage people to eat more healthily. We do it in all sorts of ways. Nobody's saying banning sugar completely. This is about using the levers of government to help create a more healthy population. We have the responsibility of looking after people when they get tooth decay, when they get poorly. Let's use the capacities that government has got to do good by helping nudge the powerful food companies in a better direction. We just heard from Hugh that once they had the signal, they were perfectly able to change their formulations to reduce sugar. Let's also make that consistent across the board so that
they did change their formulation, but obviously in some cases there was a substitution with other chemicals.
Yeah.
Right, and as Richard said, these are processed items that not entirely sure that I want my children consuming those chemicals either, right? So I'd rather having water. But the point is there has to be a balance between where the state starts to take responsibility and people are left with responsibility for themselves who are informed. But the other problem is you then get a kind of slippery slope. So if you look at other supposed tools, for example, the congestion charge in London, right, which was supposedly for all our health, it's now just a total tax grab. By the Mayor of London, right? It's become a nice little earner. Let's do more of it. Same with the tax on booze, right?
It's a slippery slope. Too much state.
No, absolutely not. You know, the state has all sorts of levers at its disposal to help steer society in a positive direction.
What about parents? What about parents' responsibility?
It's about
better labelling.
It's not an either or.
Health.
Let's absolutely have better labelling, but we know that we've got a problem.
All right.
Eating too much sugar and that having harmful effects on our health. Well, let's use tax.
Just before we move on, and just for your interest and information, according to the Parliament website, you were an MP. You came in 2015.
Oh, I did.
Be useful for future. Useful for future. In 2016 was announced by George Osborne and implemented in in 2018.
Young and inexperienced.
So did you oppose it? Or?
I can't remember.
No, clearly. But anyway, now you know when you're elected an MP.
Teeth, yeah.
Through gritted teeth. Right, let's
well,
talk...
new MPs learn from this experience, right?
Right.
I'm in the greasy pole, whipped into action.
Well, it must have been in the first few months, was it?
Yeah, I don't know that much detail. I was really hoping you'd remember. Let's move on and let's talk about immigration. You also heard in the headlines. And let me show you this from BBC News. Sex offenders to be denied asylum rights in new law. According to the BBC, asylum seekers will be denied the right to stay in the UK if they have been convicted of sexual offences, the government has just announced. Under the changes, this will be extended to anyone convicted in the UK of a crime which places them on the sex offenders register, regardless of the length of their sentence. I understand that that would have happened if your sentence was more than 12 months. It's not exactly clear how many cases the change could affect, David. I mean, it's not going to be a massive number, is it?
I don't really think the number is the key thing. It's about what's right and what's fair. And we're a very compassionate country when it comes to asylum seeking and refugees, and so we should be. But at the same time, that compassion has to be matched with fairness and public safety. We've just been talking about public health. Public safety is so important. And when it comes, in one level, it amazes me that it's not already the case.
There may be a lot of people who feel like that
but
exactly.
But it's time that the government is proposing to bring this in.
Right.
So
I mean,
excellent.
what sort of difference do you think it will make more broadly in terms of immigration numbers?
Well, it's hard to say in terms of the impact it'll have, but to be honest, it's about, as I said, it's about what's right, what's fair and what's just, and public safety. In the end, if you are a sex offender, you shouldn't be given refugee status.
Do you support this move?
Do you know what? If somebody's guilty of a sex offence, then absolutely they should be punished. I think, to be honest, it probably ought to be on a case-by-case basis because of considering the grounds on which somebody is seeking asylum in the first place, whether they should be imprisoned in this country or punished by deportation.
Right, so there are cases in your mind where people might have committed crime, sex offence crime, under 12 months, for example, and you would be happy for them to stay?
In theory, if somebody was an asylum seeker because they were highly likely to be put to death when they went back to their country under a punishment system that we do not agree with, then I think that should be done on a case-by-case basis. But I think what is happening here is that the government is trying to distract from the much bigger issue, which is about migration.
I don't think this is a distraction at all. I mean, this is a matter of justice.
May I just finish? Because I did let you finish. But as you've acknowledged, this probably is relevant to a tiny number of people, a group of people that nobody's going to have any sympathy or support for. But what it's doing is the government talking about that, generating media attention and focus on that issue rather than on the much bigger issue of how can we address the need for a proper asylum system, the need for safe routes. The reason people are dying in the Channel is because there aren't safe routes for them to get here. The need to fix our asylum system so that people aren't waiting months and years while they could be doing useful things, contributing in the country. These are much bigger, larger issues.
All right, well, I'll come back to David in just a moment for that. You've been shaking your head all the way through this. You must welcome then this move that the government is announcing.
Yes, but the reality is that all asylum seekers, all foreign criminals who commit offences should, by matter of course, be removed and deported. Nobody should have the right to claim asylum or, frankly, human rights. If you breach your responsibilities and you are from overseas, then that's it. Thank you very much. That's not how we do things here, and away you go. Lock, stock and barrel. I think this is just noise. I mean, of course it sounds right, but the reality is anybody, any person from overseas who is convicted of an offence should be removed. And frankly, we should clear out our prisons of about 10,000 people.
Any foreign person.
Any convicted criminal who is in our jails should be deported. That would free up 10,000 spaces. We've got a shortage of prison spaces. We're letting people out who should be retained in prison. So let's clear them out, create 10,000 spaces, and then we can fill them up with people who should be in jail.
You have plenty of opportunities.
Who are in prison abroad.
Well, yeah, I'll come back to that.
Also commit crimes.
Nothing like as many.
Well, do you know that?
Actually, yes, I did see some data. I haven't got it specifically, but I did see some data which showed that it would be many more who would be
well, how many are we talking about here?
No
do you know
idea.
Well, then how do you know there are many more Brits? I mean, I haven't seen data. Well,
the point is that anybody convicted of a crime in this country
all right, yes,
from overseas
you've got that
should
principle.
be deported.
Well, what do you think of that, Kit Morehouse? I mean, obviously, successive Conservative governments haven't done this before. Do you agree?
Well, foreign national offenders who are, I think, in prison for more than 12 months are routinely deported on their release. So that does happen already. And I think Ellie's exactly right. To me, this is a kind of standard dead cat, let's drop something on the table, because sex offenders are not routinely given asylum in this country. If that is detected in their record as part of their application, they are denied.
And that's the truth, David.
And
this is not going to make...
what this is a distraction from the kind of record numbers that we're seeing, notwithstanding the...
Under your Conservative government, that's where you reach the record.
I know, it's been difficult, right? It has, but the claims were made, right, and promises have been made that are not being fulfilled. And I just wish, to a certain extent, the government would be honest about this. Now, I differed from my own government about what a solution was, and I've suggested in the pages of a national newspaper what I think the only solution to this can be, because my experience in fighting organised crime over the last, 10, 15 years tells me that whatever a government does directly, they'll just react to. They'll do something else. They change their pricing, they change their model, they move around.
They didn't in Australia.
The only way we're going to the
Australian model.
It was slightly different in that they were crossing a 3,000-mile ocean.
Well,
right?
Hang on.
But the point is that if you could agree an exchange deal with the French, people would stop coming.
You don't have to agree on an exchange deal with the French. No, you don't.
Well, you do in theory, Richard. You do have to have the permission or at least some sort of agreement with the country that you're going to send people back to. I know, and I've heard you say before, that you would just do it anyway and see how the French actually deal with it. But
the French have a legal obligation under the UN 1982 Convention of the Law at Sea to stop people leaving their shores. The Belgians did it and it stopped the boats. The French refused to do it and it doesn't stop
Well, Kit,
it just doesn't work like that. I mean, in truth, the French do stop about 50%. About half get through and come into UK waters and have to be dealt with on our side. It's just not the case that they could stop 100%, and they should be.
But Smash the Gangs hasn't worked,
and aside from anything else,
I mean,
they could just let them come through.
It hasn't worked in the same way that we had stopped the boats, and that didn't work either. I mean, if you look at the numbers, I've got the headline here, migrant crossings hit 10,000 so far this year. That's 40% up on the number who arrived by the same time last year.
400 plus today.
And Keir Starmer has said repeatedly, we can do this. I've smashed terrorist gangs, I'll smash these gangs.
So Smash the Gangs has barely started. I mean, the key piece of legislation...
Well, no, clearly not.
30,000 later, you've been in charge for 10 months. What are you doing?
Well, it's barely started. The legislation that will introduce the counter-terrorism powers that we've been talking about has not even passed Parliament yet. We've increased enforced returns by 21% in the given period over the last year, and 24,000 have been returned. So, this is slow but steady. As Kit said, nobody said this was easy.
The British people are not going to tolerate 50,000 people crossing the Channel this year. I'm telling you,
crossings from France just by working better with France.
But the thing is, Richard, it's how you stop it. It's how you stop it. Let me just come to Ellie's point about safe routes, just to get a bit of clarity. You'd expand the number of safe routes by,
Absolutely.
I don't know, and how many people, would you take everyone who comes from those countries once you've expanded the safe routes?
Clearly, the UK can't provide asylum to everybody who seeks
it. Where would you draw the line?
We've got to recognise that the reason that people seek asylum in the world, and there are tens of millions of people seeking asylum in the world, is because they are fleeing violence, fleeing conflict. We've shown as a country huge generosity.
Conflict in Albania.
As a country, we've shown huge generosity and shown that we can absorb large numbers of people fleeing from Ukraine, for example. I want to see a system that's fair, where we're not just saying that if you come from this one country, we'll support you because we're a compassionate country.
Voters might want to know
how
many more countries would you like to set up a safe route with? Well, let her answer that and then I'll come to you, Richard.
So on the numbers, I actually don't think you can just set a number. We've had governments for years, decades, that have set targets, 10,000, 100,000, whatever.
No, what numbers there? What I mean is how many more countries would you have safe routes with?
We need to have safe routes for anybody who is fleeing under a well-founded fear of persecution, so that they can apply from within that country. So the reason that people are taking boats to come here is because they have to get onto our soil before they can apply.
Let Richard respond.
So they have to endanger themselves hugely to get here, even if they are fleeing horrific violence. We need to have a system that is far more compassionate and fair and accessible to
Richard,
people
what do you say?
Where they are fleeing.
Do you think there's support for that?
No, there's no no support for that at all. I'm hearing it on the doors, day in, day out. People are fuming, absolutely
And the reason
furious.
they're fuming is because you are whipping up anti-migrant hatred
Nonsense.
and saying that
you
they're
have
to
no
blame for
idea
all the
how
social
angry people are.
problems.
Let me just tell you. You have to have a number, you have to have a target, and then what happens, Ellie, when someone says, when the government says, I'm so sorry, you don't qualify. So if from their legal, safe route, they don't qualify, what are they going to do? They're going to get on the boats and continue to die
and
in their dozens.
In those circumstances, it would be much more reasonable to have a policy that is about stopping gangs and so forth. But when people have no alternative whatsoever, no Ukrainians are coming over on boats because they've got other ways of getting here, because we've said we recognise you've got a justified fear and we want to support you.
Would you at least look at that, Richard?
Hang on, I've always supported the Ukrainian scheme.
No, but more
why
safe
would we
routes.
support refugees from one place and not from anywhere
But you
else?
have to have a number. And interestingly, 20 years ago, we had about an average number of asylum seekers that were accepted in the UK of about 20 to 25,000. And about 20 to 25% of applications were accepted. The rest were returned by a Labour government that was returning some 40,000 every year. That's what we need to get back to.
And these days, it's more like 3/4 of applications are granted because people
Because of a woke
are
Home Office.
fleeing. No, because people, it's international law that you have to prove you've got a case under.
Well,
because people are fleeing.
All right, but Richard,
Funny
what
how
do
it's
you do?
different in
But
European
Richard,
countries where they've got much lower acceptance
But they
rates.
still have problems in terms, as they see it, with people coming across.
Huge problems. I mean,
boats.
Ellie's right. There is a major problem with international immigration. Major problem. You have to have clear, robust, sovereign borders.
Right, but what would you do then about
here.
deporting people where we don't have agreements? We don't have agreement with Afghanistan. We don't have an agreement with Syria because we don't talk to or do deals with those governments. And a large number of those people come from those
In that very
countries.
small number of nations, you're going to have an arrangement with a third nation. The Conservative government thought Rwanda was the answer.
we saw how well that worked with
didn't
Rwanda,
work.
didn't
I
we?
never
I mean-
thought that would work. You might be looking at something like the Ascension Islands or others, but you cannot accept. This is going to get far worse unless we change course. And I've asked the Home Secretary time and again, how long do you try this ludicrous policy of smashing the gangs before you accept? It's not working. You've got to adopt the reform policy. Pick up and safely take back. We know it works. It worked in Australia with a variation. And until we do that...
So you don't know it would work here?
We do know it would work because a
but
variant
without
of
the
it-
agreement of the French?
Well, we say to the French very clearly, you've got this international obligation, and if you don't pick up the boats, we will, and we will take them back. And guess what? Within 3 or 4 weeks,
Let me just come over to this side. They've been very quiet, actually.
This is a problem, as we all know, many years in the making. 4 Conservative manifestos promised to bring down immigration numbers and failed.
Hang on, this is illegal we're talking about, not legal.
And the smashing the gangs has barely begun, as I said. The counter-terrorism powers that will be introduced by the new bill that's going through Parliament at the moment will begin to impact that. For 6 or 7 years, these gangs have been operating essentially with impunity. We've got to start tackling them. These are the criminals here. These are the people smugglers, and these are the people that we've got to take on.
Right. I mean, Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, is also looking at reviewing the framework, I think she uses the term, for a right to a family life from people seeking asylum. Will that work while remaining a member of the European Convention on Human Rights?
Don't know. I'm not a lawyer. You'd have to ask a lawyer.
Right. Do you think it will work?
I think the review is the right thing to do. There are some egregious cases that have come up in the court system where people seem to have abused that particular article within the ECHR, but the government's committed to the ECHR.
Right. It says, yes, we'll continue to comply with international law.
But this is why the review is going on.
Well, everyone seems confident that it will comply with international law, Richard.
Well, I think we should leave the ECHR. Essentially, it's a politically biased court. It's part of the whole European Union set up that the British people voted to leave. And I think if you have a referendum on the ECHR, I'm absolutely certain...
And there are other parts of your party who would agree with that?
I think there are, yeah. Probably. I think there's definitely been a general frustration with the ECHR of the last... But it's not just in the UK. That's across the board in all sorts of countries. And so I do think there is a case to talk to our allies in the European Convention about what reforms we could bring to the court.
Right.
It has become, in some cases, too exploratory, and lots of countries think that way. And so for me, rather than leave, I think we should try reform.
Right. Do you agree with that? Reform? Is there reform to be made in terms of the right to a family life or not?
The right to a family life is a fundamental human right. and human rights are, by definition, universal. We have a proud tradition in the UK as British people of standing up for, leading the charge on expanding human rights in many ways. And I just think so many people in this country would be so saddened to see this country move in a direction that's about shutting lots of people out of access to the full human rights. Where there are complex cases, courts are the right place to judge them. But for me, fundamental to British values is a commitment to universal human rights, and that even applies to people that I disagree with or might not like very much.
All right, well, let's talk about some of the discussion we've been having this week, which is about any pact or coalition on the right of British politics, because in the last 24 hours or so, both Nigel Farage and Kemi Badenoch have both strongly denied that there are plans for some kind of Conservative reform pact. Let's hear a little bit more of what they've been saying.
I don't want to do a deal with the Conservatives. I only do deals in life with people that I trust. And frankly, after their big majority in 2019, they let the country down. Millions and millions of new immigrants coming into Britain, a population explosion affecting everyone's quality of life.
Nigel Farage has said that he wants to destroy the Conservative Party. You don't do pacts or go do deals with someone who wants to destroy you. You make sure you fight and fight to win.
Let's talk to the Deputy Editor of Conservative Home, Henry Hill. Hello and welcome to you, Henry. Doth they protest too much?
I mean, I don't think either of them want to do a deal. Whether or not, when we get very close to a general election, that their nerves start fraying a little is another question. But it really, in many ways, doesn't make sense for either of them. If you think about the potential right-wing electorate in this country as a Venn diagram, in theory, the section of that Venn diagram that would to which a pact would appeal is only the overlap, right? And not the voters who are maybe Conservative voters but really don't like Nigel Farage, or are Reform UK voters but don't like the Conservative Party. Think about it from Reform's perspective. In all but I think 9 of their second place seats, where they're best placed to try and take a seat next time, they are in second place to Labour, not the Conservatives. Now, you know, it might be that they can squeeze the Conservative vote anyway by dint of becoming the right-wing option in that seat. But given that many of those seats turfed the Tories out only last year, is it really helpful to the Reform candidate to be the local official Conservative equivalent? If you're a Tory MP who's either trying to defend a seat in the South, whether you've got a narrow majority against the Greens or the Liberal Democrats, or pick up a seat in those traditional Conservative heartlands, is it particularly helpful to try and be associated with Nigel Farage if you're trying to pick up a seat from the Liberal Democrats? So there are a lot of downsides to a deal for both parties.
Right. Can the Conservative Party win again if the right is divided?
It would, in the long term, it would certainly be much, much harder. They'd face the same kind of structural challenge that the left has traditionally had in this country whenever there has been a substantial third party, such as the Liberals or the Liberal Democrats. Now, so in the short term, I think, but it suits neither party particularly to have a deal. But if, say, Reform did manage to break through, obviously the polling currently shows them winning hundreds of seats, but even if they managed something like 60 seats and built up a permanent presence in the House of Commons, then I think that would be a very different conversation, and we would probably, if they could sustain it, end up in a position where eventually the right was choosing between whether they went with the New Zealand, Canadian or Australian model for having an inter-party cooperation agreement. But that is a conversation for the future, I think, not a conversation for the next few years.
But you can understand, can't you, when you look at the polling, you can't see it, but I'll read it out to you. We'll show it here in the studio and to our viewers. And the national polling is Reform on 25%, Labour on 24%, Conservatives on 22%, the Lib Dems on 14%, the most popular they've been in 6 years, and the Greens at 9%, as popular as they've ever been. I don't know what you're hearing from MPs within the Conservative Party about the possibility of a pact. Does it make sense when you look there at the combined polling figures? Yeah, you beat Labour.
You do, if you assume that you can simply take the Conservative and Reform columns and stack them on top of each other without consequences. Conservatives love doing this during the years of UKIP. You know, there would be oh, well, if we just add the UKIP vote to the Conservative vote, then we're doing absolutely wonderfully. But as I said, voters are individuals, and often individuals who act in quite sort of unexpected ways for people who think in Westminster terms essentially about left and right and all the rest of it. There's lots of people who are flirting between the Liberal Democrats and Reform, for example. So it's tempting, especially if you're a sitting Conservative MP, because unlike 1997, This time, the seat majorities for the seats the Conservatives still have are much narrower. They're not safe in the way they were safe in 1997. So if you're a sitting MP, for some of them, there's always the temptation of, oh, it'd be really nice if there wasn't a Reform candidate on the ballot paper next time. It would make me a bit safer. But whether it makes sense for the parties overall, given that they don't even seem to agree on very much at the moment, so what would their programme for government be, is a very different question.
What about at a local level? After these local elections, could you see working together, Reform councillors, Conservative councillors? I mean, it does happen across the piece with other parties, Labour and Lib Dems or Labour and Greens and so on.
You could. I mean, the Conservatives historically, not so much anymore at the national level, but historically the Conservatives were a very, very decentralised party, and one of the relics of that is that Conservative councillors get to decide for themselves who they go into coalition with or what deals they strike at town hall level. Whereas, for example, with Labour, it has to be signed off, I think, by the NEC, and Reform, as I understand it, it has to be signed off, by Nigel Farage. Now, Farage has said no deals, no pacts, no agreements, nothing. I think that's really unfortunate, and it will be an interesting test because maybe there will be some councils that Reform win outright. But if you're a Reform councillor and you've got a group of Reform councillors, you've got your own democratic mandate, you've given up your time and energy and money to campaign for a chance to make a difference in your local area. And a deal with the Conservatives would allow you to take control of the council and make that difference. Are you going to refuse just because Nigel Farage has said no deals at any level? I think that it's actually better when local politics is a bit more divorced from national politics.
Right, well, conveniently, we have somebody from Reform in the studio. Thank you very much, Henry Hill. Are you really ruling any scenario like the one that Henry has just outlined?
There's two separate issues. First,
want to do that? Well, just do that one first.
Look, I think, obviously, we want people to vote Reform. We're making that very clear. Sure. I think the application afterwards of common sense, whether it's on an individual vote basis, you've got to look at that. But as a principle, the point is, we know what we stand for, and we're urging people, vote Reform. If you want absolute clarity in your local council, if you want to save money, if you want to action stuff, if you want to audit stuff and sort things out, you've got to vote Reform. Right. New people on the block. That's what we're saying at the local level. But at the national level, look, frankly, this conversation is, I mean, it's interesting to the Westminster bubble. But bluntly, I mean, it's completely irrelevant. Well, the truth is we don't agree on significant elements of policy, on immigration, on net stupid zero, and for example, on how we should treat things like British Steel and the water companies. We're actually
got big differences.
From the Labour Party.
Let me just go back to what you said at a local level, because you're the deputy leader of Reform. So you're saying after these elections, Reform councillors who may be elected in an area should consider working with their Conservative colleagues if it means they could run the council.
They will talk to us at HQ at an individual level and work out what is the right thing to do. That's the appropriate way of adopting this, and then common sense will apply. Ah,
right. Well, it sounds like those deals should be done in a common sense way, to use Richard's word, post these local elections with the Conservatives.
Well, I don't know. You have to wait and see what the result looks like. And over time, I mean, I was in local government, never in a pact like that, but all sorts of strange coalitions come together at borough level. We'll see where it comes out. My worry is, though, that we'll end up in the situation that we had at the general election, which is where Reform effectively usher in the opposite of what voters intended, which is in seat after seat across the UK. We saw Labour MPs and Liberal Democrats delivered because of a Reform protest vote. And my concern is that we'll see that again across the UK. And of course, that what I said to my constituents was you might feel good on the day registering your protest, but you've got to live with that decision for 5 years.
Well, let's see. But I mean, we're going to get a lot more votes at these local elections than the Conservative Party. Of that, I have no doubt whatsoever.
Right. Can you be as confident?
I don't know. I think we'll do well. We've certainly been knocking on a lot of doors and delivering leaflets. And I think people will reflect soberly on exactly that conundrum. Do I register a protest because I'm broadly unhappy, or do I make a decision I can live with and that I have confidence in for the next 5 years? And I think if they do that, they'll vote Conservative.
I mean, when you look at the numbers, of course, David, we heard there from Henry Hill, in a large number, in perhaps the majority, Labour have Reform as their second-place rival.
Well, it's interesting to note that neither of my colleagues here are ruling it out, are they? It sounds very much like there's a
well,
pact.
I'm afraid I don't control Basingstoke and Dean Borough Council.
This is the thing. It seems very, very unclear, even at a
we don't believe in central control at the Labour
Westminster level, that there is clear uncertainty or mixed messages coming out of the Conservatives. It sounds to me like if you vote Reform, you get Conservative.
You get common sense. That's what you get. I mean, with your central control, you're not allowing any common sense to be applied locally.
In Basingstoke, and Labour are in coalition with the Greens and the Liberal Democrats.
I mean, you've done this before. It's sensible politics, isn't it?
I am fully in favour of a more cooperative approach to politics, and indeed a more proportional approach to elections and getting people to work together wherever there is common ground. There is basically no common ground between the Greens and Reform. And I think that if you vote Reform in local elections, you're going to get people a party that thinks it can govern by slogan, has no experience at local level and has complete inconsistency. Nigel Farage says we'll not do any deals with anybody. Richard Tice says just now, well, maybe we'll make deals.
I haven't said that at all. I said people will talk
Joe actually pressed you on that, and you did confirm that.
People will talk to HQ and we will work out the right thing to do.
Yeah, but it's not ruled out, which is what Nigel Farage had said.
Local government is really serious business. Local government is serious business. People need people who are going to properly serve them and work in the public interest rather than just in their narrow party interest, who are going to engage with the details of it on the ground. At national level, we've got to recognise we've got an incredibly fragmented political picture.
Isn't that exciting?
Now, what we need is a change in the political system. We need Labour to recognise which side their bread is buttered.
I don't think they're going to do that, are they, when they've got a big majority at the moment?
No, but I think this is the thing. They've got a two-thirds majority on a one-third of the vote, and that is incredibly fragile, as has just been pointed out. People are disillusioned with the main parties.
All right, Ellie, let me put a proposition.
Rightly.
Let me put a proposition to you. If we look at the polling now, and we do cast ahead to the next general election, yes, it is some way off. You can see the figures here. It could be very difficult for Labour to win an outright majority. They may be the largest party. If David were to say, Ellie, come into government with us or do a coalition with us, you'd be delighted.
I have said all through, I've been involved in politics nearly 10 years.
So?
Politics... Joe, just to finish, politics has got to be about finding common ground and working together. I believe we need a political system, a proportional political system that will...
even without a proportional system.
Seriously, that will incentivise people from all parties to sit together and work out what is best for the country and work together where there is common ground.
Well,
so
would you be happy to form a government with the Greens if it came to it?
We're 10 months into this government, Joe, and I think we've got a lot to
do.
do.
We've
got our manifesto.
4 years
We've got our manifesto.
Right, fragmented politics is what you've all been saying.
The fan club might disintegrate.
Well, hang on. Let me just show you.
It's just warming up. I mean, look at us. We've gone from 14 to 25%. We're leading in the polls.
We've gone from 5 MPs to 4.
The country is...
Exactly, yeah.
Well, just wait and see.
I mean,
the country is...
talking of fragmentation.
And the country wants change.
Yeah, but hang on. In the Conservatives' case,
I mean,
Kemi Vade, not the leader, is under an awful lot of pressure. Are you saying that she should rule out, even beyond the next election, any sort of work with Reform if it means defeating Labour?
Absolutely, yeah. We have to win on our own terms. Richard and I agree on assisted dying, but not on much else. He's not discernibly a Conservative. He's a member of a fan club, not a political party. And in truth,
nonsense.
Pacts and deals do a disservice to the electorate.
We're on the way up, and the Conservatives are on the way down.
Clear, honest message of why they should vote for us, and that's what I want to do.
Let me just show you. How has our political system served us in the last 15 years, Kit? I mean, this is my point. We've got to get beyond this sloganeering. We've got to recognise the first past the post system, the two-party system is broken. It's over. We've got to have a grown-up conversation about what the best way forward is.
The most worrying thing is the state of our politics. It is a fragmented scene at the moment. My concern is about turnout. I think there's going to be a very low turnout in these local elections, and I just don't think that's good for democracy.
Right. Let me just show you this before we move on. In the Critic, Jenrick, the Shadow Justice Secretary, the Tories' saviour. Kit, it's time the Conservative Party admitted its mistake and elected a new leader. Apparently, it's quoting two anonymous, admittedly, Conservatives. Were you one of them?
Absolutely not. What a totally ridiculous thing to say. She's only been in for a few months, right? Give her a chance. The Conservative Party has to rebuild. We absolutely do. We have to rebuild around a shared set of values and beliefs that become clear and were opaque at the last election. And I think she's exactly the right person to do that. And I think, to be honest with you, the first person to disavow this story would be Robert Jenrick. Right, he was out at the weekend saying absolutely not. Right, he's full square behind her, and so we should all be. You've got to give
well,
her
we've
a
got
chance.
4 parties here, as you will have noticed, viewers of Politics Live. We have spoken to others throughout this campaign. Let's go back to Canada, because the Prime Minister, Mark Carney's Liberal Party, has won the election. We talked about it yesterday, marking a remarkable turnaround for the centre-left party. Let's listen to part of his victory speech.
America wants our land, our resources, our water, our country. Never. But these are not idle threats. President Trump is trying to break us so that America can own us. That will never, ever happen.
Right. Well, it was a stunning victory by the centre-left party, the Liberal Party, there, Mark Carney. Donald Trump, and him standing up to Donald Trump, was really at the forefront of that campaign. Are you rethinking in Reform your coziness, chumminess to Trump?
At the end of the day, people vote in the UK for British domestic policies, and that's why we're leading in the polls. And look what happens in Canada. I mean, it's interesting how those polls have gone up and down. That's their business. I'm not going to interfere. But the reality is, here in the UK, what we're hearing on the doorsteps, it's all about illegal and legal immigration. That is what is infuriating the British people, and that's why we're leading in the polls.
Let me just show you this picture. This was from 2016, I grant you. There is Nigel Farage. Do you think you'd be advising him not to have a similar photo in any elections coming up here?
Look, at the end of the day, we're focusing on domestic issues. We've got a crisis in this country of immigration. We've got a crisis of immigration.
Richard really doesn't want to talk about this, does he?
We've got a crisis about, we've got no economic growth, and we've got net stupid zero that is destroying industries,
but you obviously
destroying
thought
jobs.
at one point that actually that association, that close relationship and friendship...
Anybody's entitled to friendships with people. Donald Trump is the elected president of the US with the biggest, I think, ever number of people who voted for him. And whether or not people like the way he goes about things, let's wait in a few months, whether or not we've got peace in Ukraine, whether or not we've got peace in the Middle East. Who knows?
All right.
That's the reality.
What's wrong with it?
It's clearly a bad thing for the world that Donald Trump is the President of the United States. It's clearly a bad thing for the UK that Donald Trump is the President of the United States.
Nonsense.
And it's clearly a bad thing for Reform.
Why are we leading in the polls then, Ellie? We're leading in the polls, so clearly our domestic policies are appealing to the British people.
I'll let you finish your sentence. You're clearly trying to distract attention from the fact that Nigel Farage is so closely associated with Donald Trump, because you know it is electoral poison in the UK. Now, on the point of Mark Carney, I think what Mark Carney has done is really, really interesting, because he very firmly stood up for Canada to the US. And unfortunately, there is a big contrast there with how Keir Starmer has approached standing up for the UK's interest. We've seen Keir Starmer slashing the aid budget, going with invitations for state visits, failing to stand up for British interests and British values. I would like to see a bit more of Mark Carney's oomph in Keir Starmer, and I think the UK will be better off as a result.
Do you agree?
I think the Prime Minister's done an excellent job standing up for British interests. We've got a strong and historic relationship with the United States, a strong and historic relationship with Canada, and I think he's doing an excellent job, and we're building towards a trade agreement.
What's Keir Starmer got out of it?
I think he's got a good, close relationship.
Yeah, but what's he got out of it tangibly?
We're currently still in discussions with the United States about a trade agreement. Let's see how that goes.
But meanwhile, we still got 25% tariffs on steel and aluminium and car imports and 10% across the board.
Much of the rest and actually, it's the same in Canada at the present. So, you can't just say that...
No, he rolled back. He rolled back Donald Trump from...
But nevertheless, there's still... Most of the world is still facing these tariffs. And the key thing is, in the end, tariffs, a trade war does not help anyone.
Well, we've only got a few...
steady and sensible government.
You go.
And that's what we've got.
We haven't got long, but go on.
With the trade deal, potentially, I am worried about what the UK government might be putting on the table. Are they signing away our ability to have a digital services tax? Are they signing away the key provisions in the Online Safety Act because Trump is acting in the interests of his billionaire tech bro?
And I will leave that question. We will find out, no doubt, if a trade deal actually comes forward. Congratulations. I'll be back tomorrow with more, but thank you to all of my guests for joining me today. Bye-bye.